What if everything you've been taught about consciousness, spirituality, and human purpose is fundamentally incomplete? What if the very foundations of reality as we understand them have been carefully constructed to keep us from seeing the bigger picture? Throughout history, mystics, philosophers, and rogue scholars have proposed radical theories about the nature of reality, theories that challenge our most basic assumptions about existence itself. These aren't the musings of conspiracy theorists or the fantasies of science fiction writers. These are carefully researched observations from individuals who dedicated their lives to understanding the deeper mechanisms of consciousness and spiritual experience. Today, we're exploring one of the most provocative and potentially life-changing concepts in alternative spirituality: the idea that human consciousness operates within a system far more complex and potentially exploitative than we've ever imagined. This isn't about rejecting all spiritual experience or becoming cynical about the nature of existence. Rather, it's about examining patterns that appear across cultures, religions, and spiritual traditions worldwide. Patterns that suggest our understanding of consciousness, death, and spiritual evolution may have been deliberately obscured or manipulated for purposes we're only beginning to comprehend. Consider for a moment the sheer statistical impossibility of what we've been told about spiritual evolution. If reincarnation truly leads to spiritual progress, and if souls have been cycling through earthly existence for thousands of years, why do we see so little evidence of this evolution? Why does each generation seem to repeat the same patterns of suffering, conflict, and spiritual confusion? Why do the most advanced spiritual practitioners often describe their path as one of unlearning rather than learning, of stripping away beliefs rather than accumulating them? Across millennia, various traditions have hinted at deeper truths about human consciousness that mainstream religion has either ignored or actively suppressed. From the Gnostic texts describing the Demiurge, a false creator god who traps souls in material existence, to Buddhist concepts of samsara as an endless cycle of suffering designed to keep consciousness bound, to indigenous shamanic traditions, warning of psychic parasites that feed on human emotional energy, there's a recurring theme that spans cultures and continents. This theme suggests that consciousness itself might be subject to influences we barely understand, and that what we call spiritual experience might sometimes be something entirely different from what we've been led to believe. The Gnostics, in particular, developed an elaborate cosmology describing how souls become trapped in material reality through deception and manipulation. They spoke of archons, non-physical entities that rule over the material realm and keep souls imprisoned through false teachings and artificial spiritual experiences. These weren't considered metaphorical concepts, but literal descriptions of forces that actively work to prevent consciousness from achieving true liberation. Interestingly, similar concepts appear in various forms across multiple traditions that had no apparent contact with each other, suggesting these insights might be based on direct experience rather than cultural transmission. Modern researchers in consciousness studies have documented phenomena that lend credence to these ancient warnings. Figures like Robert Monroe, who founded the Monroe Institute and spent decades exploring out-of-body experiences, documented encounters with non-physical entities that seem to have their own agendas regarding human consciousness. His research suggested that human awareness extends far beyond the physical brain and can interact with intelligences that exist in different dimensional frequencies. What's particularly intriguing about Monroe's work is that he approached these experiences from a scientific rather than religious perspective, yet his findings often aligned with ancient mystical teachings about the nature of consciousness and the existence of non-physical realms. Quantum physicists like Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, and more recently, Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose have noted that consciousness appears to be fundamental to reality itself, not merely an emergent property of complex brain chemistry. This suggests that awareness might operate according to principles we don't yet understand, and that it might be subject to influences that exist outside our current scientific paradigm. If consciousness is indeed fundamental to reality, then the possibility that it can be influenced or manipulated by forces we don't recognize becomes not just plausible, but likely. Consider this. Every emotion you experience, love, fear, anger, joy, despair, ecstasy, generates measurable electromagnetic fields around your body. These fields can be detected by sensitive equipment and vary in frequency and intensity based on your emotional state. Ancient traditions like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and various shamanic practices have long recognized that humans are energetic beings with life force or vital energy flowing through specific channels and centers. What these traditions understood intuitively, modern science is beginning to measure and verify through biofield research and studies of human electromagnetic emissions. But here's where it gets interesting. What if consciousness doesn't just generate energy, but serves as a kind of battery or generator for forces we don't fully comprehend? What if the emotional and spiritual energy we produce through our experiences, both positive and negative, is actually being harvested by intelligences that exist beyond our normal perception? This isn't necessarily sinister in intent. It could be as natural as plants converting sunlight into chemical energy, or as symbiotic as the relationship between flowers and bees. But it raises profound questions about autonomy, awareness, and whether we're conscious participants in this exchange or unknowing contributors to something we don't understand. When we examine major world religions and spiritual systems with this perspective in mind, certain patterns become impossible to ignore. Most organized religions emphasize surrender to higher powers, often through intermediaries like priests, gurus, or institutional structures that claim exclusive access to divine truth. These systems frequently involve practices that generate intense emotional states, ecstatic worship, profound guilt, overwhelming gratitude, existential fear, or desperate hope. From prayer cycles to meditation practices, from ritualistic ceremonies to repetitive chanting, most traditions involve activities that dramatically alter consciousness and emotional states in predictable ways. Nearly all religious systems offer future benefits, heaven, enlightenment, liberation, reincarnation into better circumstances, in exchange for present compliance with their teachings and practices. This creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, one of the most powerful methods for creating psychological dependence. The promised rewards are always just out of reach, requiring continued participation in the system to eventually achieve them. This doesn't necessarily invalidate all spiritual experience, but it does suggest that organized systems might serve functions beyond their stated purposes of spiritual development and divine connection. The concept of reincarnation, found in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and numerous other traditions, presents a particularly interesting puzzle when examined critically. While often framed as spiritual evolution and the opportunity for consciousness to gradually perfect itself over multiple lifetimes, some researchers have noted troubling aspects that don't align with this positive interpretation. If reincarnation truly serves spiritual development, why does memory erasure between lives prevent souls from learning from past experiences? How can consciousness evolve if it can't remember what it learned in previous incarnations? The karmic debt systems found in many reincarnation-based religions create what appears to be perpetual obligation. No matter how much spiritual progress you make, there's always more karma to work off, more lessons to learn, more lifetimes needed to achieve liberation. This creates a psychological framework where liberation is always possible but never quite attainable, requiring endless cycles of return to physical existence. Near-death experience accounts sometimes include beings directing souls to return to complete their earthly missions. But how do we know these beings have the soul's best interests at heart? If the system is designed to keep consciousness cycling through physical existence, wouldn't the administrators of that system naturally encourage souls to return? Dr. Ian Stevenson's groundbreaking research at the University of Virginia documented over 3,000 cases of children remembering past lives, often with verifiable details about deceased individuals they couldn't have known through normal means. What's particularly intriguing about this research is that these memories typically involve traumatic deaths and unresolved emotional attachments. The children often remember dying violently or unexpectedly, and they frequently express strong emotional connections to people and places from their previous lives. However, These memories almost invariably fade as the children mature and become more integrated into social systems, educational frameworks, and cultural conditioning. This pattern suggests that the ability to remember past lives might be natural for consciousness, but that social conditioning systematically erases this capacity. If reincarnation truly serves spiritual evolution, wouldn't retaining memory of past experiences be beneficial rather than problematic? The fact that memory loss seems to be a built-in feature of the reincarnation system raises questions about whether this system serves the evolution of consciousness or something else entirely. Modern physics tells us that all matter is energy vibrating at different frequencies, and consciousness research suggests that awareness itself might operate according to similar principles. Consider how different emotional states correspond to different brainwave patterns. Beta waves at 1330 Hz represent normal waking consciousness, often characterized by anxiety, stress, and analytical thinking. Alpha waves at 8 to 13 Hz indicate relaxed awareness and creative states, where the conscious and subconscious minds can communicate more freely. Theta waves at 4 to 8 Hz occur during deep meditation, REM sleep, and profound spiritual insights, while delta waves at 0.54 Hz are associated with deep sleep, healing states, and connection to universal consciousness. What's fascinating is that different spiritual practices seem designed to induce specific brainwave states. Repetitive chanting, for example, can quickly induce theta states where consciousness becomes highly suggestible and open to influence. Intense emotional experiences, whether positive or negative, also alter brainwave patterns and can create states where critical thinking is temporarily suspended. If consciousness operates on frequency principles, then it becomes theoretically possible to influence or tune awareness through various means, some of which might not have the conscious person's best interests as their primary goal. Ancient practices like meditation, chanting, and breathwork all alter brainwave states, but we rarely question the ultimate purpose or destination of these altered states. While many practitioners report beneficial effects from these practices, it's worth considering whether some techniques might also make consciousness more susceptible to external influence. This doesn't mean all spiritual practices are problematic, but it does suggest the importance of approaching them with awareness and discernment rather than blind faith. The Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic frequency, has been artificially altered in urban environments through the proliferation of electrical systems, wireless technologies, and industrial electromagnetic pollution. Our modern environment is saturated with frequencies that didn't exist during most of human evolution, and we're only beginning to understand how this affects consciousness and spiritual sensitivity. EMF pollution from devices, cell towers, and electrical systems creates a kind of technological interference with natural consciousness states, potentially making it more difficult to access subtle spiritual experiences while simultaneously making awareness more susceptible to artificial influence. Media, education, and cultural narratives work together to promote specific emotional and mental states that serve social and economic systems rather than individual spiritual development. The constant stream of news, entertainment, and social media is carefully designed to generate emotional reactions, fear, desire, anger, envy, hope, that keep consciousness engaged with external stimuli rather than turning inward for spiritual development. Processed foods, pharmaceuticals, and environmental toxins affect neurotransmitter function and can significantly alter consciousness states, often in ways that reduce spiritual sensitivity and increase psychological dependency on external systems. The fluoridation of public water supplies is particularly interesting in this context. Fluoride accumulates in the pineal gland, often called the third eye in spiritual traditions, and calcifies this gland over time. The pineal gland produces DMT, often called the spirit molecule, which appears to be involved in mystical experiences, dreams, and altered states of consciousness. While water fluoridation is promoted for dental health, its effect on spiritual sensitivity is rarely discussed, despite the fact that many mystical traditions have identified the pineal gland as crucial for spiritual perception. The first step In any form of liberation is recognition, but this doesn't mean becoming paranoid or rejecting all spiritual experience. Rather, it means developing discernment and personal sovereignty over your consciousness. True spiritual development requires the ability to distinguish between authentic spiritual experiences and artificial ones, between guidance that serves your highest good and influence that serves other agendas. This kind of discernment can only be developed through direct experience and careful observation of the effects different practices and influences have on your consciousness. The importance of questioning everything cannot be overstated, including the ideas presented here. Develop your own direct experience rather than accepting any external authority, no matter how credible they might seem. Monitor your energy by paying attention to what activities, people, or environments leave you feeling drained versus energized. Notice which spiritual practices increase your sense of personal sovereignty, and which ones create dependency or make you feel like you need external validation or guidance to access spiritual states. Practice neutral observation by learning to witness your thoughts and emotions without immediately reacting or identifying with them. This skill allows you to step back from the automatic responses that keep consciousness trapped in predictable patterns. When you can observe your internal states without being controlled by them, you begin to develop the kind of awareness that makes manipulation much more difficult. Reduce frequency pollution by spending time in nature, away from electronic devices and urban electromagnetic fields. Natural environments support the kinds of brainwave states that facilitate authentic spiritual experience while helping to clear artificial influences from your energy field. Develop internal authority by cultivating your own direct relationship with consciousness rather than relying on external systems, teachers, or technologies. While guidance from others can be valuable, ultimate spiritual authority must reside within your own direct experience. Any system that encourages you to give up your personal sovereignty or to stop trusting your own inner guidance should be approached with extreme caution, regardless of how spiritually advanced it claims to be. True spiritual development might not involve joining systems or following prescribed paths, but rather developing your own discernment and maintaining conscious choice in all matters. This includes emotional regulation, through learning to generate your own emotional states, rather than being reactive to external circumstances. When you can consciously choose your emotional responses, you become much less susceptible to manipulation through fear, desire, or other emotional triggers that are commonly used to influence behavior. Mental clarity involves developing the ability to think independently of social programming, media influence, and cultural conditioning. This requires conscious effort to examine your beliefs and assumptions, questioning where they came from, and whether they truly serve your spiritual development. Understanding energetic boundaries means learning how to protect and direct your life force energy, recognizing when it's being drained or misdirected, and taking steps to maintain energetic sovereignty. Perhaps most importantly, conscious dying involves preparing for the transition of death with full awareness and choice. If consciousness continues after physical death, then how we navigate that transition becomes crucial for our spiritual evolution. Many spiritual traditions describe the death process as involving encounters with various beings, lights, and scenarios that can influence where consciousness goes next. Developing the awareness and discernment to navigate these experiences consciously, rather than being swept along by confusion or emotional attachment, might be one of the most important skills we can cultivate. Perhaps the most radical insight emerging from this investigation is that human consciousness might not be the center of the spiritual universe. Just as we've discovered that Earth isn't the center of the physical cosmos, we might need to recognize that human awareness exists within much larger systems of consciousness that operate according to principles we're only beginning to understand. This could include planetary consciousness, with Earth itself as a conscious entity with its own needs, purposes, and evolutionary agenda that might not always align with individual human desires. Cosmic intelligence might involve galactic or universal forms of awareness that operate on scales we can barely imagine, with purposes and timelines that dwarf human concerns. Interdimensional beings might exist in parallel realities, or different frequency ranges, with their own evolutionary needs and agendas. Our own species might be in the process of developing into something beyond current human understanding, and what we experience as spiritual challenges might actually be part of a larger evolutionary process. Rather than exploitation, the relationship between human consciousness and these larger systems might be symbiotic, beneficial to all parties. When conducted with awareness and genuine consent, the problem might not be the relationship itself, but our lack of conscious participation in it. When we're unaware of these larger contexts, we can't make informed choices about our participation, and we might inadvertently contribute to processes that don't serve our highest spiritual development. We stand at a unique moment in human history where multiple factors are converging to make this kind of investigation both possible and necessary. Never before have we had such sophisticated tools for studying consciousness, from EEG and fMRI technology to quantum physics and biofield research. Never before have we had such global access to diverse spiritual traditions, allowing us to compare notes across cultures and identify common patterns that might indicate universal principles. And never before have we had such urgent need for authentic awakening, as our technological power has outpaced our spiritual wisdom to a potentially dangerous degree. The proliferation of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, and other powerful technologies is creating capabilities that could fundamentally alter human consciousness and spiritual development. If we don't understand the nature of consciousness and its relationship to larger spiritual systems, we risk making choices that could have profound unintended consequences for our species' spiritual evolution. The development of virtual reality, brain-computer interfaces, and other consciousness-altering technologies makes it increasingly important to understand the difference between authentic spiritual experience and artificial simulation. The question isn't whether these theories about consciousness harvesting and spiritual manipulation are absolutely true or false. The question is whether investigating them leads to greater freedom, awareness, and authentic spiritual development. Even if these concepts are only partially accurate, developing the discernment and sovereignty they require can only enhance your spiritual journey. And if they're more accurate than we might hope, then developing this awareness becomes not just beneficial but essential for spiritual liberation. Your consciousness is your most precious resource, and how you choose to cultivate, protect, and direct it may be the most important decision you ever make. The invitation is to move from unconscious participation to conscious choice, to become the author of your own awareness rather than merely its subject. This doesn't mean rejecting all external influence or becoming spiritually isolated, but rather developing the discrimination to choose which influences serve your highest good and which ones serve other agendas. The journey toward authentic spiritual freedom begins with a single step: deciding that your consciousness belongs to you and you alone have the right to determine how it's used. This might seem obvious, but consider how many external authorities claim the right to guide your spiritual development, how many systems demand your emotional energy and devotion, and how many influences operate on your consciousness without your explicit consent or even awareness. True spiritual freedom requires not just the recognition of these influences, but the development of practical skills to maintain conscious choice in the face of them. This includes the ability to distinguish between authentic spiritual guidance and manipulation, the capacity to generate your own spiritual states rather than depending on external sources, and the wisdom to navigate the death transition with full awareness and choice. Remember, question everything, including these ideas. True wisdom comes from direct experience, not from accepting any external authority, including this presentation. Your consciousness is your laboratory, and the experiments you conduct there are entirely your responsibility. Approach these investigations with both skepticism and openness, testing everything against your own direct experience rather than accepting anything on faith alone. The path of conscious awakening is not easy, but it's the only path that leads to genuine spiritual freedom. It requires courage to question comfortable beliefs, wisdom to navigate complex spiritual territories, and persistence to continue the investigation even when it leads to uncomfortable truths. But for those willing to undertake this journey, the reward is nothing less than the reclamation of your own consciousness and the possibility of authentic spiritual liberation.